Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. They offer free checking with industry-leading mobile banking. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more.
Virginia Tech football had its annual spring game on Saturday, April 13th in Lane Stadium. We'll recap the game, chat about the overall weekend, discuss where the Hokies stand as spring ball concludes, and hit on some other news on episode 360 of the Tech Sideline podcast, which starts right now. We're recording on Wednesday, April 17th, 2024 from our high-tech studios in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. As always, the first month of subscriptions is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. This episode is also presented by the Master of Agriculture and Applied Economics degree at Virginia Tech. The Department of Agricultural and Applied Economics at Virginia Tech is a premier world-class department ranked globally in top 10%. Visit online-ms.aaec.vt.edu today to learn how you can accelerate your career with our 100% online Master of Agriculture and Applied Economics degree. I'm your host, David Cunningham. I'm filling in for Giovanni Heater, the voice of the Salem Red Sox, who has to call a rare morning game today. To my right is Chris Coleman, Tech Sideline's lead analyst and columnist. Across the way is Andy Bitter, our senior staff writer. Jack Brizendine is behind the scenes producing. Before we get into the spring game, Chris, how was your weekend? How was tailgating? The weather looked pretty good.
I didn't go tailgating.
You did not tailgate?
I went bar hopping instead.
How was that?
Excellent.
Good.
I got carded at Tots.
Wow.
Whenever you get carded, it could always be the last time you get carded. So those are moments to cherish.
So you're cherishing that.
I am.
Were the bartenders drunk? What
no, it was the guy out. It was the guy outside, the bouncer.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's just like blanket. We're
I
carding
told him,
everybody
like,
coming
you're gonna
in.
feel really stupid when you look at this ID, and he's like, "Oh wow."
He took
So
him.
I got
He's
the
like, I
stamps
have to
and
subtract
You
this
must have
large
had,
number
you must have
from
had
this
your
small
hat
number.
on.
I did.
Yeah,
I
there's
did.
no way if you took your hat off that they
No chance.
Virginia Tech had its spring game. The Maroon team won 21-14. Kyron Drones led the Maroon team to 3 first quarter touchdowns. The Orange scored the last 2. PJ Prelude scored 2 touchdowns. Jarecius Hairston caught a touchdown pass. Pop Watson ran it in for a score, as did Traylon Mitchell. Andy, what were your initial impressions, initial takeaways from the spring game?
I thought Drones looked pretty sharp in his brief action out there. I think he had 3 or 4 drives and 3 more touchdowns on those drives. So you probably like to see that from your starting quarterback, going out there and having an efficient day, not getting hurt, getting in and out of the game quickly like that. But, you know, it's kind of a typical spring game. I mean, a lot of the top guys sat out. You don't want to put them at risk in a game that's sort of a meaningless thing here, and give some of the younger guys a chance to show out. And some of them took advantage of the opportunity. I thought, Keyshawn Burgos looked especially fast off the edge out there. I think some of the younger receivers like Aiden Green, Takai Heath, Xavion Turner-Bradshaw, they look pretty sharp in different spots. I think the transfer tackles look good in the brief action that they had. A fairly quick, short and sweet spring game, and they fit it all in the nice 2-hour window for the ACC network.
Chris, when you left the spring game, when you were walking out of the stadium, whether it was at halftime or the end of the game, what were you thinking about as far as what stayed in your mind when you thought about the game, maybe when you went to bed that night?
You know, you always get the same question after every spring game. What do you think? And I don't ever have any hot takes after the spring game because it's the spring game, and we've talked about it over and over. We've seen quarterbacks perform poorly in the spring game, and they go on to have a great season. We've seen this is not the first 3-sack performance we've seen from a spring game either. Jeremy Haynes. My basic takeaway was Tech's skill position talent has come a long way in 2 years. I think Virginia Tech's third string running back right now, Jeremiah Coney, he would have started for Virginia Tech 2 years ago. I think guys like Aiden Green and Xavier Turner Bradshaw, who are probably fourth and fifth right now at wide receiver, they would have started for Virginia Tech 2 years ago. So I think Virginia Tech has improved their talent level on that side of the ball quite a bit. They've improved their talent level defensively as well in some spots, although, you know, you would argue that they don't have a Chamari Connor on this team at safety. But, you know, they're just, in general, you watch them play and you feel like there's more talent. There's definitely more talent. Now, that's my overall takeaway.
Did anything surprise you?
I don't think so.
No. Andy, anything surprise you?
No, because nothing really jumps out. I mean, the guys that really stood out are guys that I don't think will have big roles necessarily on the team coming up. I think that's just sort of the way the game was structured. So, if you're around practice for, the 14 previous practices and you're talking to coaches over the time, I don't think anything's really going to jump out and surprise you, because at some point along the way in the spring, that will slip out or that will sneak out. Oh, this guy's having a really good spring. This guy's doing pretty well. So not too many surprises, I thought, from my end.
Kyron Drones comes in, leads Virginia Tech's Maroon team to touchdowns every single time he was on the field. Brent Pry referred to him as air tag after the game because he wasn't letting anybody touch him. And as we talked about last week, he's, he and a lot of these big time players are literal investments now. Did he do anything to dampen the excitement I think that Virginia Tech fans have coming into this fall? I feel like this was the first opportunity, because like last spring game he didn't really play super well. The offensive line was kind of unbalanced. I feel like this was really the first opportunity that it was like Kyron's whole show, and it was that coming in. Yeah,
I think that he sort of supported the excitement that's around the program, because he looked pretty sharp in his couple series of action there. We talked about the sacks in that game. I think he had only one of the sacks. So you think, hey, behind that offensive line that he was playing with, which had a lot of the starters, and Montavious Cunningham there, the way Drones went out there, operated the offense, moved the ball around, didn't put it in danger too much. There was the one that got picked in the end zone by Dorian Strong.
That was the sack.
They had whistled him down beforehand. I think afterwards he said, no, I knew I was going to be whistled dead, so I just threw it deep. It's like, okay, maybe. I don't know if that was necessarily the case, but, he went out there, and I think he operated the offense the way you wanted to see him do it. And you go, okay, if he can do that for a whole game, a whole real game, and then a whole season on top of that, I think Tech has got a pretty good quarterback.
I think he was sharp. I think, especially when you consider the defense knew he wasn't going to run the football. So every time he's dropping back, you're like, well, he's not going to scramble, because if he gets anywhere near anybody, they're going to blow him dead. So you really don't have to worry about that aspect of it as a defender. But even with that, I thought he was still pretty sharp throwing the football. So I thought it was a pretty good one-quarter cameo.
Did anything stand out to you, Chris, about the backup quarterback competition between Pop Watson and Dylan Whitkey?
Pop got a lot more work, obviously, at least in terms of passing attempts. And based on that, and based on what we saw in the previous week's scrimmage, I think he's the number 2 quarterback. I know Pry has said some days it's been Whitkey, some days, and he says that every spring if there's a quarterback battle. But both times we've been there, I felt like he had the upper hand. And at no point since either guy enrolled last January have I seen Whitkey ahead of him on the depth chart in terms of what number they are when they're going through reps and practice and things like that. So, I mean, I would be shocked if it wasn't Pop Watson at this point.
Yeah, I think Pop looked pretty good out there. I think if there was one critique of both quarterbacks, both the backup quarterbacks, is they held onto the ball too long in situations. I know, sacks in the spring game, anybody gets near them, they're going to whistle it dead. But there were some legitimate ones where the defender's like on them, and the ball's got to be out quicker. And I think that comes, with reps and experience, and these are still pretty young guys out there. But I think Pop showed that he could be a viable backup right now. I don't know if this means the Tech won't pursue anybody in the transfer portal there. My thought on that is like, who are you going to get at this stage? And especially, who are you going to get that you're going to get to commit knowing that they're coming in not going to be the starter? Drones is the starter. You're not coming in and going to compete with him and all of a sudden supplant him as the starting quarterback out there. You'd be coming in to be a backup. And if that's the case, I wonder what kind of caliber player you could even get. And why would you upset the backup order in that case? Wouldn't you want, Pop or whoever the number 2 to be to get those full complement of reps in the summer, August, going into the season? So, I think Pop showed enough that you could probably come out of that going, okay, we can roll with him as the backup quarterback this season. But I don't know if the coaches feel that way. We'll see, how aggressive they are in the transfer portal.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And my whole point is, first of all, I do think he's good enough to be the backup this year. If you bring in somebody else, it's going to be a backup, and they're not going to have spring practice to learn the offense. Right. So what are their chances of beating out Pop? And if he's not the number 2 quarterback, like once the season starts, that third quarterback isn't getting as many reps. So you don't want to stunt his progress like that to a certain extent. Now, if another quarterback were to leave and you weren't comfortable with like Davi Belfour as your third quarterback, then, I could see them bringing in, if they found somebody, a transfer from maybe a lower level who had multiple years left, and you could sell the guy, okay, Drones is our starter, but, he might end up going pro, so you can come in this year and, you'll be able to compete for the starting job with Pop next year. That'd be your only hope of getting somebody. But, right now I'd be inclined to stand pat, but, if another quarterback, like if Whitkey decided, well, I'm not coming back because Pop is the number 2 quarterback and we're the same age, then it might be ideal to find somebody in that situation. But at this point, I'm not interested in blocking Pop because I think he's got a good future.
Virginia Tech will have, 4 quarterbacks on the roster this year, adding
scheduled
Davi Belfour.
Right, adding Davi Belfour.
And 4 scholarship guys.
4 scholarship guys, yes. And Chris, I believe you wrote yesterday that the Hokies are potentially targeting 2 2025 kids.
They've already got 1 commitment, and then Keldon Ryan from Texas, and Malik Washington of Washington took an official visit over the weekend, and I think Tech's in decent shape for him. And they've also offered 1 kid from South Carolina who's also in the mix and will probably end up taking an official visit. But yeah, they want to take 2 quarterbacks in this class, it seems like.
That could be a pretty stacked quarterback room then. I mean, you're looking at potentially 6 guys.
Everybody always gets excited when there's a quarterback commit, but when you take 2 in one class, it's like, well, how many of those guys are really
it never stays at 6. Yeah. It will find an equilibrium somehow because these guys will transfer out to find opportunities to play. So that's why you take a lot of them, figure out who can play, who can stay, and then the others go elsewhere. And that's just sort of the way quarterbacking works these days.
Andy, I thought one of the most interesting things Kyron Drones said when I had the chance to talk to him after the game was he was asked about Pop Watson, and in a kind of similar sense relating it to the role he was in last year, where Kyron did not necessarily have the best spring game, and he was asked about Pop's mobility and if he feels like Pop is much better than he showed because he's able to use his feet. I thought his answer was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the case in the spring game, though. They don't want to put anybody at risk out there. You just have to deal with it as a player that, there's some parts of your game that you can't showcase. And I could understand Pop's frustration with that, just like I could understand Drones' frustration last year, because you look at when he gets in the game and he does move around like that and runs, he's a difference maker. If you can't quite show all of that in practice, you go, well, okay, am I giving my full impression to the coaches here? So I can understand, but I also understand the coach's side of it. It's like, hey, we don't have a ton of quarterbacks here right now. 3 scholarship quarterbacks in the spring. You definitely don't want to get one of them hurt. So do what you can to protect them, and they can show out in different ways.
We saw him go live in the scrimmage last week, and that's where I thought Pop really elevated his game, as he made some plays with his feet. Not just scrambling and running for yards, but scrambling, keeping his head up, and then completing passes down the field. So I think that, I understand fans want to see it, because they don't know. Now that I've seen it, it's really, I would say, strengthened my view that he's the number 2 quarterback. And I'm not saying, oh yeah, no problem, I would completely trust him if he came into a football game, but I think he's made very acceptable progress in 1 year, and I think he's a lot further ahead now than he was last year. I know he made that one play in last year's spring game that got everybody excited, but he was a very, very inconsistent player last spring. He's showing a lot more signs of consistency this year, I think. I think there are two things he'd probably like to have back, probably the fumble, and then, like Andy said, holding it on the ball a little too long. But overall, I think he's, for a redshirt freshman, I think he's fairly advanced. And I think that goes back to high school. His dad was a coach, and he was a 4-year starter in high school. He's got a lot more experience than Dylan Whitkey, who only started for 1 year. It was a high level of football in the state of Georgia, of course, but the fact of the matter is he only started for 1 year, and it was a run-heavy team, and I don't think he threw for 1,000 yards in that 1 year either. So it's just on-field snaps make all the difference in the world, and Pop has had a lot more of them.
The running backs were very involved across the board. Bashal Tootin didn't really play much. Malachi Thomas had a 66-yard screen pass. 7 of the 31 completions went to running backs, and then a bunch of them had pretty good games on the ground. Andy, from Jeremiah Coney and Traylon Mitchell to PJ Prelo and Tyler Mason, did any of those guys stand out to you at all?
Yeah, I think Coney did. I mean, Brent Pry's been talking him up since last spring or last August, I guess. And, he got hurt earlier in the year, and that kind of forced a red shirt for him. But I think otherwise he might have played a little bit, maybe not enough to burn the red shirt because they had 2 guys ahead of him that were obviously get the lion's share of carries there. But I thought he was a guy who looked like he went north-south pretty well. I mean, he ripped off a 33-yard run on his very first carry. Finished with, 81 yards and 11 carries. I mean, that's a pretty good day right there. So that would make me feel better about that number 3 spot. You have proven guys in Tootin and Thomas that can go out there and produce. You always want another guy behind them just in case, because a running back's always going to get nicked up at some point in the season. So I think coming out of that, I felt pretty comfortable with their top 3 backs, and Coney is a guy who could play this year.
I thought he looked good. I think if you go back to last season, he did redshirt, but he had 11 carries. That's the same number of carries that Bryce Duke had, who was their number 3 tailback. He had more carries than Chance Black, who was the 4th tailback, and he's since transferred out. But they every opportunity they had to get him into a game without blowing his red shirt, they took, because I think they're really high on him. He's 6 foot, 200 pounds now. Speaking of which, let me go on a little rant about the ESPN presentation.
Yes, I saw your rant in your story the other day.
I don't understand how a multi-billion-dollar organization like ESPN and a $130 million organization like Virginia Tech Athletics can screw up and use last spring's weights during the ESPN broadcast of the show. I mean, they had Coney at 189 pounds. Yeah, he was last spring when he enrolled. Now he's listed at 200. Pop Watson, they said it was 176 pounds, which he hasn't been since last spring. He was listed at 190 in the fall. It's like, you would think between everybody involved in that, they can, where do you come up with those numbers? Literally online.
Well, if they were the exact same as last year, they honestly probably just duplicate. Was probably just
probably not updated in their system. Does anybody look at that and it's like, man, Pop Watson just isn't making size?
They probably
maybe
just didn't
Chris,
change
you
it.
might be the only person watching that going like, man, that's like 10 pounds off. I don't know what the heck they're doing
here. It's 14, man.
It's
a big difference. It's a big difference. You're not big enough to play at 176 pounds. You are big enough to play at 190 pounds. So to me, that is,
yeah. In one of the other things you mentioned in your story was better skill depth for Virginia Tech. When you think about how this running back room has kind of changed, I mean, we're entering year 3 under Brent Pry. Year 1, Stu Holt was basically trying to whittle it down to 4, 5, 6 backs. There were so many guys in the program.
Yeah.
And Bashal Tootin comes in last year, obviously had a great season, and now you get to the point where I feel like you're pretty comfortable about your top 3 guys.
Yeah, there were a lot of running backs there when he first got here, and only one or two of them were actually good enough to play. So, and now it's I think you've got at least 3 who were good enough to play, and they're talking to transfers too, apparently, and we'll get into that later. It'll be interesting to see. Last year, they used a straight up 2-back rotation. And it was 2 for 1. It was Tootin in the game for 2 drives, Malachi Thomas in the game for 1, Tootin in for 2, Thomas in for 1. So basically it was a 2 for 1 in terms of numbers of carries. And that's That's how Billy Height used to do it at Virginia Tech back in the day. You know, whether it was Lee Suggs and Andre Kendrick behind him or whoever. That's how Billy Height always did it. So is that an Elijah Brooks thing, or is it going to be, well, those are the two backs we felt comfortable with? What if they had three backs they felt comfortable with? Would they expand that rotation? I think it's hard to do that and keep everybody happy, but because and you want guys to get in a rhythm as a running back, right? You know, like when one of your running backs is Baishal Tootin, who is one of the best backs in the country at breaking tackles, do you really want to add a third running back into that mix? Because the more carries somebody else gets, the fewer Tootin gets, right? So there's got to be somebody not happy at the end of the season, but I think the Hokies definitely have more options now.
Am I crazy to think that PJ Priolo looked really fast?
I was going to ask you about that.
Out there. Like, I know he's a walk-on. I know it's a spring game, and I know we've said 1,000 times, take spring game with a grain of salt, everything about it. He just looked really shifty and fast out there. And, like, I mean, he hasn't been a running back the whole time that he's been here. I feel like he was a defensive back for a little bit. He's mostly done special teams.
Wide receiver, right?
Yeah, he blocked a punt there in a game. Was a Pittsburgh game?
That was at Pitt.
Yeah. He just looked really fast out there. And I look at that and I go, could he be like a third down back or a situational type thing? I don't know. I'm not smart enough with football evaluation to go, wow, that was just spring game and he's never going to play or anything like that. But I thought that some of the moves that he made out there and his ability in space, I thought it was pretty impressive.
You should go back and watch his high school highlight tape at Radford. It's insane.
I'm sure
you're definitely right about his quickness. I mean, it's legit. And I know it wasn't great competition, you know, playing for Radford, but you're right. He's a really good athlete.
I mean, the bloodline's there.
Yeah.
We know he comes from an athletic family. That's been verified. So
Well, he's quicker than his dad. Like his dad was a safety type.
I think the most important thing with that to note is that it wasn't like he was doing that against like the third or fourth team guys. He was doing it against, like, he was taking the handoffs from Kyron Drones.
Right. Exactly.
Like he's doing it against the first string guys. I think the most interesting thing, you kind of mentioned it, Chris. You heading into the fall at running back is, you know who your number one guy is. It's Baishal Tootin. How do you like if you're Virginia Tech, I feel like you would want him on the field as much as possible, getting as many touches as possible, because great things happen when the ball is in his hands. How do you kind of manage everybody else? Manage Malachi Thomas, you know, if you're going to give him carries, manage Jeremiah Coney, right? And I think one of the other things is Tootin's also touching the ball on kickoffs too. We've seen him take 2 back now. So how do you kind of, if you're the coaching staff, how would you kind of balance everything? Is it just, I'm giving Baishal the ball every single time he's on the field, or is it kind of would you kind of continue with like that 2-for-1 and maybe kind of throw Coney in there on occasion?
Yeah, that's the big evaluation that I think needs to be made is Coney versus Malachi Thomas. I think Coney's got a higher ceiling. I think Malachi's a good back. I guarantee, I bet they're thinking about it in some ways, like how good is Coney is in pass protection at this point, because that's generally the last thing to come for a running back. They can all run the ball to a certain extent, but like understanding blitz pickups and where you have to be and things like that. I know fans scoff at that, but can you imagine if they put in Jeremiah Coney this year and he wasn't ready from a pass blocking standpoint and he got Kyron Drones knocked out of a football game? Then you'd be like, oh, why is he playing, right?
Well, that was always like the knock on like Trayvon McMillan.
Sure.
He was 1,000-yard rusher, and blocking was not his forte on that thing. And, you know, they moved on from him to other guys like Steven Peoples, who was a better blocker. And people go, wow, why you let a 1,000-yard rusher go out the door? And it's like, well, they kind of had the exact same yards per carry average, but they had that one element of the game that was just sort of missing. It's just sometimes it's not a strength for guys.
You have, I think, 1 or 2 running back names written down on your sheet, Chris. There have been some rumors. It feels like Tech is kind of targeting a running back or 2. Do you feel like it makes sense for the Hokies to add if it's the right fit?
I think Virginia Tech at this point, we've seen them in the past where they needed to add people just to get bodies. Like, who was the offensive lineman they took last year from like the FCS?
Clayton
Frady. Like, they needed bodies, right? So they found a body. Now I think they've got enough bodies. So right now you're looking to add quality and preferably with multiple years of eligibility remaining. I don't think you go out there and take a senior and say, well, yeah, we're recruiting you just to be second string at this position or whatever. At this point, I think there's enough talent in the program where you don't want to do that and block your younger players, particularly your younger in-state players. You've got Ramon Brown from Maryland, originally committed to Virginia Tech under Justin Fuente, then decided to sign with Maryland when Tech made a coaching change. Elijah Brooks was his running backs coach at Maryland, so he would be very, very familiar with him. Brown's been in the portal since late November, early December. Didn't transfer anywhere this spring. There's some rumors that he needed to get himself academically eligible. Tech has also made contact with Dallin Hayden of Ohio State, who I believe has 2 years left either. 2 years ago, he rushed for over 500 yards in a backup role for Ohio State. I don't know. I don't know that I'd want to take another running back unless something happened, like maybe Malachi Thomas were to leave or something like that. I'm not interested in blocking Coney at this point, especially if it's like you preach in-state recruiting. And you've been hyping up Coney since the day he got on campus. So why would you block him at this point? I wouldn't, but if somebody else were leaving, then sure, I could see that becoming a possibility.
Andy, you wrote in your 5 thoughts on Sunday that this is the deepest wide receiver room in quite some time. You look at the kind of the top guys, the guys everybody knows, Jalen Lane, DeQuan Felton, Ollie Jennings. I think what's most interesting is those and obviously Stephen Gosnell's out right now, but those 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys, that the Aiden Greens, the Xavion Turner Bradshaws, the Takai Heaths, the guys that feel like they could potentially factor in. Did any of those guys catch your eye on Saturday?
Yeah, I thought all 3 of those guys that you mentioned, Green, Bradshaw, and Heath, all look pretty good out there. I mean, Green's been doing it all spring. He was the most improved player in offense. The award they handed out, I feel like he's going to force his way onto the field this year. And might have played more last year as a true freshman, if not for, all the veterans they had in that room. But, I thought both Heath and Bradshaw made a lot of plays from the slot. They looked very comfortable out there, very quick. Those crossing patterns, they look very effective. That's a nice, easy way to throw short passes and let the receiver turn them into big gains. So you always hear receivers coaches say, we want to play 6 or 7. We want to go 6 or 7 deep. I've heard that every single year that I've covered Virginia Tech, and they've never been able to do it. Like, never. Usually it was like 2 or 3, and then it drops off a cliff after that. And it's like, okay, well, the next guys are really developmental at this point and just not ready to get out there on the field at this stage. But I mean, legitimately, you can go that deep with this group and I think feel pretty good about the players. I mean, obviously the 4 guys coming back, Aiden Green pushing that group as well. We'll see about Tucker Holloway. I don't know how serious his knee injury is going to be here. He missed the spring game, was in street clothes out there. We'll see how long that lasts for him. But then Heath, Bradshaw, I mean, Chance Fitzgerald made a nice play up the sideline.
He did.
He's in his second year. They've got standout freshmen like Keelan Adams and Chance Wiggins that in a normal year, you go, these guys are probably trying to get on the field this year. And I don't see why you would do it this season. I mean, maybe to get a taste of action, but I certainly wouldn't burn the red shirt on either of those guys because there's just not enough snaps to go around. So, this is a fingers crossed, knock on wood situation that these guys stay healthy. But I legitimately think it goes very deep in that room, and it's probably the deepest I've seen since I've been covering the team.
Amazing that you can sign a 4-star top 5 player in the state of Virginia who took an official visit to Alabama, and you're going to get to redshirt. Right? Like, that's how deep this wide receiver group is.
But what was it 2 years ago? It was Caleb Smith, and then you're praying for something
exactly
when you throw the ball down the field. I mean, that's what it was. And, you can see why Fontel Mines keeps getting raises and promotions because he's completely turned around this wide receivers room, just in terms of talent that's coming in and production that they're having on the field.
Yeah, I think Aiden Green is a really good prospect. He's got like a smoothness to his game that I really like. Like, I bet if you went out there and put him through like an NFL combine type thing, I don't know if he would be like scoring A+ in anything, but he's probably solid at everything. I just think he's a natural receiver. He knows what he's doing out there. Showed to be a willing blocker last year too, and that can be tough for true freshman receivers. And right now, I think he's the fourth receiver with Gosnell out. I actually think he's closer to the top three than he is to fifth, and that's nothing against Turner Bradshaw, who I think is ready to play and contribute. But I actually think Green is going to keep that number 4 spot. That's my take with just getting consistent reps throughout the spring. I think he's a high ceiling guy. I think he's going to be more of a target than he was last year.
In your time, can you compare this kind of depth in this wide receiver room to anything that you've seen?
Yeah. 2005, 2006, they had Eddie Royal, Josh Morgan, Justin Harper, David Clowney, Josh Hyman. 4 of those 5 guys went to the NFL. Hyman had been Tech's leading receiver when he was a redshirt freshman in 2004. But then by the time he was a redshirt senior, he was like their 5th wide receiver. I mean, that's how deep that group is. They were incredibly deep. Like in this day and age, I don't know if they would have kept everybody for 4 years, but like that. That group was so loaded. So yeah, I would say that's similar to this group. I think it's a similar level of talent.
On the offensive line, Andy, did you feel like that group's performance in the spring game made you feel one way or another, better or worse? And I mean, allowed 13 sacks, I say in air quotes. Did you see any glaring mistakes? Or I know you mentioned it earlier, Kyron Drones was playing behind what could be part of that starting group and had 3 straight touchdown drives. So how do you kind of evaluate the offensive line?
Yeah, it's always tough in a spring game because they're mixed and matched just like everybody else, but that's probably the one position group where that takes its biggest toll. If you just plug somebody new into right on your right when you're blocking and you don't have that familiarity with them, there's sort of like a unspoken trading off guys when you don't have to speak the communication. If you don't have that feel with that person, it certainly affects you on the field. That said, it seemed like the quarterback had a lot of pressure on him throughout the entire game. Parker Clements, I don't think, had a great game out there. I think that's a concern. Just the tackle depth that they have on this team, and perhaps that's why they're looking at this kid from Arkansas who's in the transfer portal right now. But it's tough to get an overall evaluation. It's not like they're lining up there out there just running the ball as much as they would normally be doing. It's not like they have the running back or the quarterback rushing threats because they're not going to put him at risk and have him run all too much in the game. So it's not really what your offense looks like. So maybe something to take away from that mostly first team group with Drones as the quarterback looking pretty good, and they move the ball down the field. But I still think this is the biggest question mark on the offense and something that still needs to advance their games enough to catch up with the other groups.
It's a lot easier to rush the quarterback, I'll say, when you know they're not going to run the option. And
it's a pin your ears back situation.
Exactly, it is, and that makes it more difficult for the offensive line, which is mixed and match anyway. So is it a little bit of a concern? Sure, but like that 13 is a very deceiving number. Like at one point in the second half, James Jeanette got a sack and didn't even celebrate. He just walked back to the defensive huddle, to the line of scrimmage. It's like if you don't get a sack in the spring game, it's almost like something's wrong with you. Right, is the way I think defensive ends look at it, at least in a game like this where the rules were what they were. You'd have to go back and look at the individual matchups to know whether there's a concern or not. Like were starters getting beaten up on by backups and things like that, then that would be a concern. But overall, I do feel better about the offensive line. They certainly look the part from a run blocking standpoint, right? I mean, Tech had a successful day running the football, no matter how you look at it. But then again, I'll pull a Beamer here. When you see good running numbers, then you worry about the defense, right? Like I'm worried about the linebackers. I didn't think the linebackers played well in the spring game. Some of that, in my opinion, is due to changing guys' positions. Like Woodson was out of position a lot. He's never played inside linebacker before. You throw him out there and he didn't do it. He didn't do it well. Jaden McDonald, I don't think had a good day at Mike. He played so well down the stretch at will, just when he was getting the will linebacker position. Now they've moved him to Mike, which is a different position. And I just don't get the whole moving linebackers around to different positions rather than letting them get comfortable in one spot. We'll see about Jaden Keller. They hype him up again for the third straight year. It's one of those things that, I have to see it on the field in a game before I'll believe it at this point. So, yeah, I'm worried about linebackers. I guess that's my main negative takeaway from the spring game. And I know you asked, we're talking about the offensive line. But that got me going on, if you think the offensive line run blocks well, then that means there's something wrong with the defense, right? And my thing is linebacker.
Well, I think on the whole, it's still a step forward for the O-line. From, last spring, that second group was dreadful. I mean, they couldn't get a serious evaluation on Drones because he had no time to do anything in the pocket. I think this year, you look at guys competing on that second team right now: Laith Gannon, Brody Meadows, Montavious Cunningham has worked with the second team a lot so far. Johnny Garrett. There's just more names that you feel like could actually contribute or get in there or push the guys that are starting if they're not necessarily performing up to the level that. Last year they struggled to get to 5, and then they worried maybe they would have a 6th guy that could possibly work his way in. Brody Meadows kind of became that guy. This year, I feel like you can go 8 or 9 and feel like you're not just completely falling off a cliff if you put this guy in the game.
Yeah, Montavious Cunningham, technically second string right now, but who was out there leading the way on the Malachi Thomas screen? He's a guy who can really move in space. And, you're right. I think they are deeper this year. You'd like to have a 4th tackle if you could potentially find one, but at the same time, I think Johnny Garrett has shown enough where they feel like they like his ceiling, and I don't know if you want to block him at this point. So yeah, little things to be concerned about, I think, but for the most part, like evaluating an offensive line's pass blocking in a spring game generally isn't completely fair to the offensive line.
Let's flip over to the defense. Andy, you described Keyshawn Burgos' performance as like a Hall of Fame spring game performance. I mean, the guy has 3 sacks in unison, back to back to back, on top of a tipped pass that led to an interception and a fumble recovery. Was that as simple as he was able to pin his ears back and go, or did you actually, did you feel like he's actually showing something that, that Virginia Tech is going to be able to take advantage of this fall?
Yeah, well, I mean, he did all that in like a quarter and a half. I mean, it was like there was one drive where I was like trying to tweet out that he had gotten a sack, and he got another one after that, and then another one right after that. So it's like just waive the 5-year waiting period straight into the spring game Hall of Fame right now. He's a guy who's, it's remarkable. He's a junior. Like, it doesn't feel like he should be a junior. He didn't redshirt that first year, and he played a little bit last year. But, I mean, he's the guy that you look at on that defensive line. You go, man, he looks the part. He's tall, and he's quick and fast off the edge like that. Some of the other guys a little bit more undersized or more dependent on their quickness. I think physically he's got that build that you look at as defensive end. You go, yeah, that's kind of what you're looking for. Ranginess and stretch and length and all that stuff. We'll see. We'll see if it's just a spring game flash like that, or if he's really ready to make more of an impact there. I think, it would be nice for Tech if he could, especially now, CJ McCray hurt his leg, was in a walking boot after the game. They carted him off the field. We'll see how severe that is. I don't know if they'll make any kind of announcement on that. Knowing Virginia Tech, probably not. But, if he's out for a serious length of time, you've got APR, you've got Cole Nelson. Burgos is probably number 3 in that mix, I would say. Then, Jordan McDonald is in there, Jason Abbey maybe. So, he could play a bigger role going forward if McCray's out for a serious length of time.
I think if you did your all-time spring game starting lineup, your starting defensive ends would be Burgos and Jeremy Haynes right now.
There you go.
Yeah,
top 2.
Absolutely. But he's a guy, if you recall last spring, they thought he was going to start opposite APR. He didn't quite come around like they thought he would. So he ended up being the 3rd or 4th defensive end. But, he was a rotational guy for him rather than a starter. And Cole Nelson ended up starting. I think they have always viewed his ceiling as being a little bit higher than the other guys because of his length. I wish they had redshirted him naturally. He is a tough guy. Like, he was a high school wrestler. I think he was like a state champion in wrestling. So he's a good athlete and a tough player. Again, it's the spring game, but he's a guy who's going into his third year, and generally when guys go into their third year, if the light is going to come on, now's about the time where it starts to come on.
Andy brought up the CJ McCray injury. Chris, you wrote about it a tiny bit on Sunday or on Monday. How do you feel about the Hokies' depth if for some reason they don't have CJ McCray?
I feel good about it. They have offered Kyron Crawford from Arkansas State, who had 10.5 tackles for loss and 5.5 sacks last year. So maybe they don't feel so good about it. But Jordan, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
yes.
Jordan McDonald would jump up to the 4th defensive end, and he was the 5th defensive end last year and played some. Like, J.C. Price is one of those few defensive line coaches who likes to rotate 5 guys at his positions.
He had a pretty good BC game, if I remember correctly.
I forget his 2 highest grading games. BC might have been one of them, but he had a little over 100 defensive snaps for the season. And this is what should make you feel good. His 2 games with the highest number of snaps were the 2 grades he graded out the highest. So the more he played, the better he played. So right now, if the season started tomorrow, he would be the 4th defensive end, so he'd be getting more snaps. And, I would feel pretty comfortable with that at this point. I think Tech has created some pretty good depth there. And again, I think it's one of the situations where if they were to add somebody like Crawford, he's got 2 years left. So I don't think you necessarily go out there and say, gosh, we need a defensive end. Let's go take a senior who's got 1 year left. And yeah, he'll be on the 2 deep and be fine. And I think I'm okay with adding, but I don't necessarily want to block an in-state guy like Jason Abbey, who I'm fairly high on long term.
I believe Abbey had a sack in the
he's done fine every time I've watched him. Can get a little bit bigger, of course, but
Jordan McDonald, by the way, had no tackles or anything against BC, so I might have been misremembering that. I thought there was a play that he blew it up in the backfield. Maybe he didn't necessarily get the sack. Maybe it was Jaden. I thought it was a defensive lineman, but whatever. There were some times last year where you did notice him on the field.
Yes. Yeah. This was another extended opportunity to watch some of those new defensive tackles: Aeneas Peebles, Kelvin Gilliam, Kamari Copeland, who had that interception. Andy, did anything kind of catch your eye about those guys, or kind of just as advertised?
I think just as advertised. I think the fact that Aeneas Peebles was the spring defensive MVP is probably a good sign. Probably did a good job in the portal if that's your best player in defense throughout the spring. I think Copeland showed off some of those athletic skills that he has by snagging that ball out of midair like that, returning it a little bit too. It's not like he just went down immediately once he caught the ball. So I feel like that could be more of a playmaking duo this year than even what they had last year, with Feldarius coming on late in the season the way he did. Probably have to see a little bit more of Gilliam. I don't know if I watched him too much when he was out there the other day. When Fuga, we've seen him for 5 years now already. I think that's a solid 4 there. And if it goes deeper than that, we'll see once they have some other guys that come in here. But I think they're pretty solid on the interior.
There's listed heights and weights, and then there's how guys look when you stand right next to them. And there's not a huge difference between the listed heights of weights of these new defensive tackles as it is like Norrell Pollard and Mario Kendricks. But when I saw Mario Kendricks and Norrell Pollard on Saturday at one point. I was within 5 feet of them. And earlier in the week, I'd just been within 5 feet of all the new defensive tackles. And the new guys are bigger. Like, they might not show on the Tech roster, per se, and their exact height and their exact weight and all that stuff. It's just bigger frames, bigger limbs, just big bone dudes, I would say. So, I think there is actually a chance that there's actually an upgrade at defensive tackle this year. I don't know if you're going to get 10.5 tackles for loss from one player like you got last season, which I still think is one of the most underrated.
From Payne?
From Payne. One of the most underrated single-season performances in Tech history, considering the number of snaps he got. But overall, I like this group. I think it's going to be an explosive group.
At linebacker, you said that is your biggest concern. I think personally, I would have said safety. This was Sam Brumfield is in at Mike. He's the transfer from Middle Tennessee. What did you think about him? I know Kelly Lawson's out right now. He was injured in the spring. What did you not like about specifically how that room is shaping up? Do you think those are easy fixes, or are you like legitimately concerned?
I think eventually, Brumfield, he didn't stand out to me positively or negatively. What I didn't like, again, was guys playing positions that I don't think they should be playing. Like, I didn't think Woodson played well. I don't blame Woodson for that because I don't think he's an inside linebacker. It's the only philosophy of this coaching staff that I disagree with completely is putting guys in different positions at linebacker. It generally doesn't work that way. They did the same thing at Penn State. Like, all those linebacker roles are so different. Brandon Smith, who was a 5-star recruit from Virginia, when he played Will, which is on the short side of the field, he was really good in pass coverage because he was covering tight ends. He was bad. He was awful against the run because he didn't hold up well against offensive tackles and offensive guards blocking him. Then the year they played him at Star, he wasn't as good against the pass, but he was great against the run because he's getting blocked by tight ends and slot receivers and things like that. You move around guys around so much, and you create artificial depth and all that stuff. But what creates real depth is recruiting guys for specific positions and then keeping them there. Like Caleb Woodson, his whole high school career played star. So play him at star. Like, I understand he's big, but if you played Brandon Smith, who's 6'5", 240 pounds at star at Penn State, then you can play Caleb Woodson there, who's a lot smaller than that. I don't like, as soon as McDonald really started figuring it out and playing well at will down the stretch, and now he's back at Mike linebacker. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And they're all different positions, but especially between that star and an inside linebacker position. You have to think about it like this. You're driving down the interstate, and let's say there's a car crash in front of you and on both sides of you. That's playing an inside linebacker position. Whereas if you're driving down the interstate and there's a car crash to the left of you, but not in front of you or to the right, that's playing the star position. There's just a huge, huge difference. And most guys who play on the outside, they don't play well on the inside. It's just, I have personal experience with that. I don't think it's a great idea, but again, I don't expect them to ever change. And I'm not saying, we should do everything that Bud Foster did, but, Bud Foster left his guys at the same position. He never, think about, Cody Grimm. Cody Grimm would be the star for Virginia Tech right now. Imagine him playing an inside linebacker position. It's not going to work. He was a safety in the NFL. And I just, I can't really say any more than that, but that's my biggest concern. I'd like to see these guys stay in the same position for multiple seasons, see how they develop, and then evaluate them. But I don't think, Jaden McDonald is not begun his redshirt junior year yet, and he's already played all 3 linebacker positions, right? I don't see how
he was cross-training at. I feel like he's cross-trained at multiple seasons.
He has, correct. Even that first spring Pry was here, I think he started off at star then, and eventually Will, and eventually some Mike, and I don't know. I just do it differently, and again, that's not me saying they're wrong, because I do think it is. Can be beneficial to have experience, but what good does it do Jaden Keller to be able to play Mike and Will if he can't play either one of them effectively? Because Tech's linebackers were the lowest grading linebackers in the country last year. Like Kelly Lawson was, I think, maybe the lowest grading linebacker in the country. And Tisdale at Mike, not a natural Mike, same thing, one of the lowest grading linebackers in the country. Same thing with Keller. Practicing these guys in multiple positions are great, but if they're not good at any of them, there's no point.
I think there's some value to it in the spring, though. If you're this far away from the season, this is where you test it out to see what they can do. And, it's not always pretty. It doesn't always work. But at least you know what they can do. And out there shuffling around right up until, the opener next season, then that's maybe more of an issue. But I don't have as much of a problem with it in the spring where it's like, all right, test these guys out, see what they can do. Is this guy better in this spot? In Woodson's case, kind of what he has at star. He's not going to start there this year. They got Keontae Jenkins back. Can he help you in a different way on the field this year? So I think this is one of those things where you look at in the spring game and you go, well, I'm not going to do a total evaluation on it because they were trying things out at different spots with linebacker.
Andy, what did you like about the DB room? I know there are some young guys like Dorian Strong and Mansour Delane. They played sparingly. Some young guys like Joshua Clark, he had an interception. What was your overall evaluation of just that group?
Yeah, top guys didn't play a whole lot. I mean, they brought Mansour in for the post-game interviews. I'm like, how many snaps did you play? Like 6? Yeah. I think it was like 9 or something like that is what he says. Like, okay, but he gave some good quotes afterwards, bigger picture stuff. I think they know what they have with that first group, and you can even extend that to Stroman, who didn't do anything really this spring and obviously didn't play in the spring game coming off shoulder surgery. They got to find some other guys to step up in spots, and, we'll see if they go after any kind of safeties in the portal. They have Mose Phillips, Jalen Jones. I think if you're just judging them off of last year, you would be very concerned about that. I think they've made some strides. I don't necessarily know if they're up to ACC level speed, if that's going to hold up once they get to the season, but probably in a better shape than they were last year when they were really thrust into action before they were ready. Cornerback, I feel comfortable at cornerback with this group and love it. And Braylon Johnson, Joshua Clark had a pick, probably pretty encouraging, just thrown right to him. I mean, it was like a gift of an interception, but you'd be amazed at how many guys drop those interceptions when they come to them. So, Penix had a big hit, break up on a 4th down pass, I think it was. So there's a young stable of guys after, those top 2 at cornerback that I think just need to get on the field, get some reps. You're going to start to see them come along. I would feel pretty comfortable about the defensive back group.
I think I feel so comfortable with it, in fact, that I think in a normal year, Josh Clark would play. I think he's pretty well advanced. He's got good speed, good length, exactly what you're looking for from a corner. They don't need him to play this year, I don't think, unless somebody gets hurt. Feel really good about that group. Mansour Delane was already a very good football player, and now he's all of a sudden the most improved player of the spring.
That's a scary thought. It's
Yeah.
like, all right, you have like a fully motivated, developing Mansour Delane here to pair with the other quarterback on the other side who had like an 11.8 quarterback rating against last year. I mean, it could really be an incredible duo they have at cornerback.
Yeah, which puts more pressure on the safeties because I don't think teams are going to be completing very many passes outside the hash marks against Virginia Tech. So that means Tech's inside linebackers and safeties are going to get targeted a lot. So Jalen Stroman, I totally trust there. I think he's a very good player. I think Mose Phillips, if they can play him on the short side of the field all the time, I think he'll be fine. It's your safety depth that is a little bit concerning. And how good will Brumfield be in coverage? Could they potentially, in a nickel package, that's when you bring in one of your other linebackers. Like at Penn State, a lot of times in their nickel package, their star linebacker would actually stay in the game and be the mic that came off. Could that be the case this year for Virginia Tech in obvious passing
To keep
situations?
more speed on the field.
Give more speed on the field, just your best coverage guys for 3rd and long situations.
I'm just going to briefly go over the award winners. You guys have kind of touched on them as we've gone along from the spring, and then I've got 1 or 2 kind of general questions to kind of wrap up our football discussion. The 2 most improved players, one on offense, one on defense, it was Mansour Delane and Aiden Green. Kyron Drones was the offensive MVP. Aeneas Peebles was the defensive MVP. Jaden Keller earned special teams MVP. Josh Fuga and Caden Moore earned the leadership awards, and Miles Ellis and PJ Prelo earned the ultimate teammate awards. The Hokies are at 87-88 scholarships. What will you have your eye on as we go into the summer? And is there any 1, 2, 3 positions you feel like, Chris, there is a need. Virginia Tech needs to get somebody.
For me, the biggest need would probably be, I'm sitting here saying I'm most concerned about linebacker. Tech has a bunch of linebackers. So, like, adding another one would be overkill. You've got enough bodies. You just got to get them in the right spots and teach them to play. There's enough athleticism there that I don't think you need to add somebody. I would probably try to add another safety if I could. Maybe a swing guy who could potentially play free or strong safety. Because I think it's really not a lot of teams maybe have 4 capable safeties. You maybe have 2 starters and then 1 good backup, and preferably that backup could maybe play both spots. And, so maybe I would try to find a guy like that if at all possible. Everything else is kind of a luxury. Like, I would like to have another offensive tackle, but at the same time, Andrew Chambly of Arkansas, Virginia Tech has offered apparently. He hasn't scheduled a visit yet. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But he's the most sought-after offensive tackle in the portal right now. And as a freshman this past year, he played 400 snaps. But, like, he had a bad year pass blocking. Like, he was a turnstile on the edge for Arkansas to a certain extent. And he's the most sought-after offensive tackle prospect right now. That just shows you how few offensive linemen are available, especially how few quality ones with, high ceiling. I think he's a high ceiling guy, but he's not somebody I would necessarily expect to bring in and say, oh, yeah, he's going to beat out Parker Clements, just like that, because he had major blocking issues this past season. He would be a guy who would provide depth and then could potentially take over as a starter next season. I don't consider that to be critical, though. I think it's more of a luxury, and some of this is going to depend on, obviously, how many guys Tech loses. You've got to lose 2 or 3 just to get to the 85. So you've got to lose even more than that before you want to add somebody. I anticipate Tech will add somebody, and, they added Powell Ryland in the spring portal session last year, right? APR. And they added the offensive lineman Frady for whatever that was worth.
Well, I think the key to say Powell Ryland went in the portal previous to that,
right?
Because they got his commitment in like late March, early April.
Okay.
Because it wasn't like waiting till after the season when he committed.
He just didn't.
He was in the portal in the winter, I think.
But just didn't decide where he was going until midway through.
I think that was the case. I'm trying to remember. But this late portal thing, it makes me wonder what kind of talent is going to be in there at this stage. And you don't have the benefit of a spring ball by getting in here. How many guys are you going to get there are so talented that they could miss spring ball and then come in and contribute? Powell Ryland was one of those type of guys, but again, he went into the portal or announced his intentions to transfer a lot earlier than after spring ball. I just, with the number of guys they have coming back, and this wasn't a roster that had a whole bunch of holes on it, I wonder if there's anybody they're going to be able to add that's going to come in and go, all right, that's a real impact guy. So I just feel like it's, people are going to get excited about a lot of names in the transfer portal like this, but I don't know how many will help too much this team.
Yeah, and, it's like you said, I think you're looking for long-term potential here if you take anybody in this portal period. I mean, all 4 of the names I've mentioned that I've gotten written down on my notepad here, they all have at least 2 years left, and one or two of them have 3 years left, I think. So if you feel like you need to bring in a senior at a certain spot, sure, go ahead. But I don't really see the need for that this year. I just think this team has better depth across the board.
One word answer for both of you guys. How would you describe how you feel about this team as spring concludes, as you head into the summer? Because the next football game Virginia Tech will play is August 31st against Vanderbilt. Chris, we'll start with you. One word to describe how just how you feel about this team as spring concludes.
Good.
Okay.
I was gonna say solid. No, it's not.
That's fine.
These aren't great words. You gotta tell us ahead of time. You use a thesaurus or something.
Sorry,
like this.
I probably should have. Yeah.
I don't. Maybe drama free. I feel like it was a pretty quiet spring which is maybe what you want from Virginia Tech. When you don't have a lot of question marks, you just like guys just go to work, put their work in, and hopefully they would be improved for the next year. I feel like some of the past springs there's been a little bit more drama, and a little bit that guy's leaving or that guy's going to the transfer portal, and perhaps we will see that coming up. And it's just the kiss of death to be talking about it like this, but it felt like that was a real quiet spring, and it wasn't anybody getting out of line or anything like that. They just kind of went straight forward, went to work.
Before we finish out with basketball real quick, just as always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all the great content across all of our platforms. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Bank with First Bank and Trust Company. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. I've got a few basketball topics I just want to touch on briefly. We're at about an hour right now. The first thing is Elizabeth Kitley. She was drafted on Monday by the Las Vegas Aces. On Saturday in Lane Stadium during the spring game, in the second quarter, they played a video. It was Liz came on and announced that her jersey was being retired. You were in the stands for that. What was your reaction?
Oh, I mean, I was happy. You knew it was coming. You didn't know when they were going to make an announcement. People were wondering, how can you retire a jersey when the rules say this and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's easy. Like, you just break the rule. Like, you're not going to jail if you break the rule.
This wasn't handed down on stone tablets from a mountain. Like, you made the rule. Just change the rule. Nobody's like holding you to this thing.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth Kitley went 24th to the Las Vegas Aces. I think that's a really good landing spot for her. One, they have some really, really, really good facilities. She'll be able to rehab pretty well there, I think. And she also will have a year to sit behind and kind of learn from some of the best. Asia Wilson, I would say, is the best center in the WNBA, and that's who Elizabeth Kitley will have the potential to back up. It's been pretty quiet on the women's basketball front, besides Megan Duffy hiring 2 assistant coaches, Sharnice Zoll-Norman from Penn State. She's a UVA alum, and Itoro Coleman from North Carolina. She's a Clemson alum. I wrote stories on that last week. Chris, I want to get your thoughts on Rodney Brown Jr., men's basketball transfer the Hokies added to the fold. He's the 3rd pickup, along with Jordan Ivy Curry, who we'll talk about in a sec, Ben Burnham from College of Charleston, and then Rodney Brown Jr. That came in on Tuesday afternoon. He's a shooting guard from Cal, just finished his freshman year.
Yeah, I think they can. I think they needed a traditional 3, like somebody with some length, and he's listed at 6'6". He's a very, very good shooter. Didn't get a ton of time at Cal this past year, but did play in every game. Had some double-figure scoring game. All his double-figure scoring games came on the road, so maybe that makes him a good match for Virginia Tech because the Hokies need to play better on the road, right? It's funny that this is technically an ACC to ACC.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah,
wow.
It doesn't make any sense, but that's the way it is.
Intra-conference transfer.
Yeah,
He played alongside Jalen Cone.
He did. That's right. Jalen Cone's been in college for a long time. He's a regular Van Wilder, but I think he's what you need. You needed some length out there, and he'll give you that. And he's got 3 years of eligibility left, so I think he's got a good ceiling too. And he's a good fit for the offense because of his shooting ability.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I feel like he's somebody that, like you said, 3 years of eligibility. He's shown that has the ability to play in some big moments, and that he's been able to score and he's able to help Cal in some pretty big Pac-12 games. But at the same time, I think if Virginia Tech and Mike Young had his way, maybe he doesn't necessarily have to have a huge role this year, kind of just a supplementary role, and then he can develop. Jordan Ivy Curry declared for the draft while retaining his eligibility. It's the same thing somebody like Justin Mutz did a couple years ago. Chris, you want to explain to Virginia Tech fans why they don't need to freak out over this?
Don't freak out. A lot of guys do this in the NBA. First of all, you're so unlikely to get drafted because there's only 2 rounds in the NBA, and you've got foreign kids getting drafted and freshmen, right? You rarely see seniors get drafted. What you can do is you can go work out and you can get feedback from NBA people. You can network with scouts and things like that. And even if you don't get an NBA contract one day, you can use that networking. Like European teams will know who you are and things like that. So this is just not. It's not a big deal. I fully expect Jordan Ivy-Curry to be on Virginia Tech's team and starting for them next year. And he's a good get for Tech, too, because he's probably going to start at the 2 guard, but he can also play the point. So by having a guy like him, ideally, Brandon Rechsteiner is your backup point guard next year. But if he doesn't make as much progress as they hope, you've got somebody else that can eat those backup point guard minutes.
The Hokies have 9 scholarship players right now, 4 open slots. Do you like where they sit? What do you you wrote a transfer portal article. I don't remember if it was at the end of the week last week or the beginning of the week this week.
Yeah.
It's all flowing together, but that was before Brown, obviously. What do you feel like the Hokies need?
Well, they need a point guard, a starting point guard, unless they plan for Jordan Ivy-Curry to be their point guard, which I don't think they are. There's a lot of smoke around Tech and Hyseer Miller from Temple, who's going to be visiting this coming weekend. He's going to take an official visit to Virginia Tech this coming weekend. His shooting numbers weren't great at Temple, but you have to understand that Temple was a bad offensive team, and the best guard on bad offensive teams always ends up taking a bunch of bad shots because he's got the ball in his hand at the end of the shot clock when there's 3 seconds left and somebody has to shoot it, right? So he's a guy that had to shoot a lot more last year than he would have to shoot in a Mike Young offense, and he'll have better shots in a Mike Young offense. He's a tough guy. He's like a South Philly guy, considered a physically tough player. I think he would be a defensive upgrade to Sean Padula, and so I think like a backcourt of him and Ivy-Curry would be. I think that'd be as good as you could possibly hope for.
Yeah,
as a Virginia Tech fan from the transfer portal, and if he had to make his decision today, I think he would pick for Virginia Tech, and I think his other finalists were like UVA, Providence, Seton Hall. I think Tech right now is his only scheduled visit, so I think that should tell you where things are trending.
Before we get to what's coming up on Tech Sideline, just a couple of notes of what else is going on in Virginia Tech athletics. Virginia Tech softball swept Boston College this weekend, all 3 by run rule. I don't know, Chris, and Andy, if you guys had a chance to see what happened.
I saw the box scores
on Sunday in the 5th inning at Tech Softball Park. So Hokies go into the inning, they're down 4-1 or 3-1, 4-1. They score 12 unanswered runs and run rule Boston College in the 5th inning. They entered the inning losing.
Yeah.
And then they end up run rolling them in the same inning.
That probably doesn't happen very often.
Sam Mostow and Chip Grubb have been terrific for our coverage. Hokies actually beat UVA on Tuesday. It is one of those weird non-conference series with UVA because the ACC didn't schedule the game.
Right.
Don't ask me why. Hokies beat UVA 6-0 on Tuesday. They've got Georgia Tech up next on Friday. Virginia Tech baseball took one of 3 games at Georgia Tech, bounced back with a 7-1 win against Radford on Tuesday night. Duke is up next this Friday. Raza Umarani has been terrific for our coverage of baseball. Jack Brizendine, the guy who's behind the scenes producing, he broke some wrestling news the other day. Virginia Tech Wrestling and Tony Roby, they picked up 2 commits this offseason. Columbia's Lennox Wolak. Did I pronounce that right, Jack? Jack said sort of.
Sort of.
And Lehigh's Connor McGonagle. I know I got that one right. McGonagle was the pickup, I believe, on Monday. Wolak will step in at 174 and replace national champion Mekhi Lewis. And then, according to Jack, a wrestling expert, McGonagle is going to move. McGonagle is going to come in at 133, and Sam Latona is going to move up to 141.
And he was like in the top 5 for most of this year.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is like one of the top transfer portal pickups in wrestling.
They're pretty good.
Yeah.
Tony Roby, they're pretty good. It's a weird time of the year now because spring football is over and now it's kind of just portal season. What is coming up? I should be asking this question myself, I guess. But what's coming on Tech Sideline? What are you guys, Andy and Chris, planning on writing over the next week, 2 weeks?
What I want to do is go back and watch the spring game again and specifically focus on the linebackers, and like when I rewatched the game on Sunday, I rewatched it just to watch the game, and I wasn't watching the linebackers. I was watching the play. And if the play was successful, I generally saw a linebacker going in the wrong direction. But I didn't specifically watch the linebackers. So I want to go back and do that and see if any of my suspicions are well-founded or off the mark or whatever. So that's what I plan to do at some point. I don't know if an article will be coming this week or next week, but I'm planning on that. And then my normal Q&A.
Andy, what do you have coming up?
We'll figure it out. I'm sure there's going to be some transfer portal activity here coming up. Probably we'll run through both sides of offense, defense, just sort of give final thoughts on each player at some point. Mailbags, trying to set something up with Whit Babcock, the typical post-spring type of stuff.
Sounds good. Yeah. For me, kind of nice, and it's a little quiet right now. Obviously there's transfer portal news on both fronts. Megan Duffy's still rounding out her staff. I would expect a third assistant hired sometime soon. I think both assistants to her current staff are really, really good. For those, I replied to somebody on the boards, and I told you about this earlier. I replied to somebody on the boards on Sunday who was like, I can't believe Megan Duffy hasn't gotten a commitment yet. And it's like, well, is she even out recruiting? It's like, yeah, I saw her at breakfast with a recruit this morning, but but go off. Yeah. Don't be surprised that the Hokies have not picked up on the women's basketball front, have not picked up any transfers yet. Last weekend was kind of the first opportunity for them to really, really visit and get a chance to meet Duffy and get a sense of campus for those who are coming in. So, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks here. Baseball, softball, obviously, is now going to be part of the main focus. And big thank you to Raza and Sam and Chip, who kind of steer that. And it's been really, really fun watching both of those teams so far this year. I'm kind of in a unique spot right now because it's kind of just waiting for the portal and waiting for coaching announcements. So as Duffy rounds out her staff. Anything else before we go, Chris, Andy?
Yeah, I was going to say for men's basketball, Jeff Goodman tweeted this out yesterday, I believe. You could see another round of players entering the portal, not necessarily Virginia Tech players, but players in general, because they're just waiting to get their last NIL check. And if they enter the portal early, they don't get that last NIL check, right? So you get your last NIL check, and then you enter the portal. So you could see more guys, a few more guys enter. So Virginia Tech has been linked with however many names. I think I've put like 60 on our portal page. And funny, 2 of the 3 commits hadn't even been listed. Like I didn't even know Virginia Tech was talking to them. So I'm not sure how valuable that page actually is. It just gives me something to do. But I'm just saying the board can still change at this point because there's still guys entering the portal.
Cool. That's a good note to end on. Anything else from you, Andy? No?
Nope.
We're good. Cool. Well, I appreciate all of you listening to episode 360 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company. For Chris Coleman, for Andy Bitter, for Jack Brizendine, I'm David Cunningham. This has been episode 360 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Thank you, and have a great rest of your week.